Okay. It's not what I want. That's what I want. Mhm. Alrighty. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hope everybody is well. Last day of the first quarter. We made it. We made it. And you made it in good shape. Good shape. Proud of y'all. All right, while we're waiting for folks to come in, because there are still quite a few people missing, I've opened up the next unit, and this next unit really is for next quarter. So we looked at the video the other day on biodiversity. We talked about the Galapagos Islands, so that was kind of introductory to biodiversity. So take a look at this. I am going to show Mr. Schmeeds, and then I'll probably just go ahead and let y'all go. I have a lot to catch up on in grading because a lot of your stuff requires uh, hands-on grading. So I do have quite a bit to do, but nobody's missing anything, so that's a good thing. So have no fear. It's not graded yet, but it will be before the end of today because it has to be. And so I need to do that. But we are going to look at the introduction. So this is Canvas. This is Canvas Unit 2.
Hey students, so excited to chat with you about the third module in AP Environmental Science, or your second real environmental science module. So in this module, we're going to be learning about biodiversity. So let me just walk you through this module a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is we have our overview page. And remember, this has all the important stuff. In fact, if you are watching this video, you're probably watching it right here. And so we're going to have our learning objectives in the module, all the things that the College Board wants us to learn about when we work through this module. And then we've got our lessons and a little bit of information about the lesson to kind of pique your interest, and the suggested reading times, estimated reading times. So this is not how long it takes for your brain to absorb this information, or for you to really focus and, you know, really get to dive deep into the information. It's just how long this should take to read. An estimated.
Okay, and I'm not going to play this whole 20 minutes, but you can use it. And all she's walking you through how you should approach the new unit. So again, these are the objectives, and these are the questions that you'll be expected to be able to answer by the time we finish this unit. We are going to look at 1.1 today. So we're going to look at the introductory module. And you all do have a link, and there is a textbook as well as your AP Classroom. So this aligns with the AP Classroom, but you also have a textbook. And hopefully you remember that you have a textbook. Let me go back to the home page and show you where that is in case you forgot. Okay, where do we want to look? We want to look syllabus. All right, there we go. In the syllabus, that's where you have the link for the textbook, the link for the College Board, and the code for College Board, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so for those of you who don't like always logging in to AP Classroom, there's a textbook, but it follows along. Mostly what we do is we follow the AP Classroom. It has the same amount of materials. The textbook is aligned with Canvas, so Canvas and the textbook kind of have the same information. So, but for those of you who like a textbook, there it is. All right, back to the module. Uh, and I think I was just kind of passing time. We are still missing a couple of people. All right. Where were we? Okay, overview. So the overview has all of the vocabulary that you need to know. So make sure that you are looking at that. Key terms. So we click on the key terms and it gives you, see, it's not a long unit, but it does have a lot of vocabulary. So spend some time reviewing all of these. Okay, so we are going to, I'm not going to wait on folks. They're late, it's Friday. We want to get this show on the road. So we are going to have our lovely gentleman, Mr. Sneeds, talk about biodiversity. Okay. Now, again, the assignments you did the other day with the Galapagos Islands, that's going to be the first assignment that'll show up in the grade book for next week. Okay, because of the way it was, the due date is dated, it's not going to be in this 9 weeks. But I see everybody has done it. You won't see that. Okay. In fact, if I grade it, it's not going to show up. So I'm holding off on that one because I got so many other things to look at. All right, so this is where we're going to be today. So, and I'm finding that it's so much better to go to the video once I've saved it in the playlist. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to watch it from the playlist.
Hey everybody, it's Mr. Smeeds, and today we'll be covering topic 2.1, which is Introduction
Oops.
to Biodiversity. Our objective for the day is to be able to explain the levels of biodiversity and their importance to ecosystems. And the skill that we'll be practicing at the end of today's video is describing environmental concepts and processes. So biodiversity is just the diversity of life in a given ecosystem, and we can measure on 3 different levels or scales. So the first and biggest level of biodiversity is ecosystem diversity. This is the number of different habitats that are available in a given area. So if we look at our diagram on the right here, we can see a bunch of different habitats. We have the ocean or potentially a large lake. We have a beach ecosystem, river ecosystem. We even have a little grassland leading up to the forest. Then we have a mountain ecosystem and even a desert on the backside of that mountain. So this is going to enable for a wide diversity of plant and animal species due to all of these different ecosystem conditions. So the next level of biodiversity is the species level of biodiversity. And so if we look at this diagram here, we can see all of the different species that are present in an area. And species diversity can be measured in 2 different ways that we'll talk about in more depth here in a second. But that's just the total number of different species in a given area, but also their evenness, or how the individuals of the entire ecosystem are distributed throughout those populations. Then finally, we have genetic diversity. Genetic diversity refers to how different the genomes or the groups of genes are of different individuals in the population. So if we look at these 3 chipmunks here, they represent a population, and we can see that each of them has a different genome. So they're going to have different genes. They might have different traits like different tail lengths, slightly different fur color. And so all of these factors can be considered biodiversity. And finally, it's really important to understand that the higher the biodiversity, in general, the higher the health of the ecosystem or the more healthy the population is. So we'll talk about numerous reasons for this as we continue with today's video. As I mentioned, there's 2 different ways of measuring species diversity. That's richness and evenness, and we'll talk about those now. So species richness which we denote with an R, is just the total number of different species found in a given ecosystem. Now, generally, the higher the species richness is, the healthier an ecosystem is. And that's because the more species that can be supported generally is an indicator of quality resources in that ecosystem, such as clean water or soil with a lot of nutrients. But it doesn't give us the entire picture. We also want to look at the species evenness. Evenness is a measure of how well all the individuals are distributed between the different species present. So evenness can help us understand, is there a balance between the population sizes of all of the different species, or are there a few dominant species in a given ecosystem? We have two communities here, community 1 and community 2, and they're both going to have the same species richness, which is 4. There are 4 different tree species present in each ecosystem. But if we want to look a little deeper at species evenness, what we'll see is that community 1 has a higher species evenness. And that's because the organisms in community 1 are evenly distributed throughout the 4 species. So there are 25% of each of these 4 species making up the ecosystem. Whereas if we look at community 2, it's dominated with 70% of the total organisms in the community belonging to one species. And so we would say that overall community 1 has a higher species diversity because it's more evenly balanced between the 4 species. So again, richness doesn't tell us the entire picture. As a rule of thumb, the higher the species richness, the healthier an ecosystem is, but evenness is an important measure to take into account as well. So now we'll talk about why genetic diversity is beneficial to populations. So genetic diversity is a measure of how different the genomes are of the individuals within a given population. Now, I want to point something out, and that's that this is not an all or nothing attribute. So all populations have genetic diversity, and it's there because there are random mutations that happen in the copying of the DNA in those organisms, but also because of recombination of chromosomes within the sex cells of the parents. Those two things give rise to new combinations of genes and also new traits altogether. And so all populations have some degree of genetic diversity. It's not like a population either does or doesn't have it. It's just that some populations have a higher degree of variability or more genetic diversity. The more genetic diversity a population has, the better it can respond to environmental stressors. So these could be things like drought or fire or famine. And that's because if there's more diversity in the genomes, there's a higher chance that some of the members of the population have traits that enable them to thrive in these new conditions brought about by the environmental change. So let's look at an example here with potatoes. A lot of times farmers plant one single species of potatoes that are actually all genetic clones of each other because it's really efficient for watering and applying fertilizer and harvesting. But what that means is that if there's a disease, in this example, a potato blight, the disease is going to wipe out every single member of that population and there will be no potatoes left. But if we look at the top half of this diagram, potatoes that have more genetic diversity, so even within the same species, there are potatoes that have a lot of genetic diversity. And when the blight hits, it's only going to wipe out a few of the individual plants in that species. And so because a lot of the plants have adaptations that allow them to survive the blight, because of that genetic diversity, we'll have a population of potatoes that survives the disease. And so again, this is just an example of how high genetic diversity within a population can protect it from environmental stressors such as disease. Now we'll talk about something called a bottleneck. A bottleneck event is an environmental disturbance that kills a lot of the members of a population regardless of their genome. So it's not natural selection, it's just a large disturbance such as a fire or a hurricane, and it's going to kill members of this population regardless of their genome. So what happens is the surviving population is a lot smaller and it has a different genetic makeup or a different gene pool than the original population. So it no longer represents the diversity of the original population. Here's an image to help us understand why we call it a bottleneck. Imagine that we have this bottle filled with all of these organisms, and when we pour a few of them out through this narrow bottleneck, we're left with a population that no longer reflects the starting population. So we have no more of the yellow trait in the new population, and it's heavily dominated by blue as opposed to being more balanced before the bottleneck event. Big takeaway here to understand is that bottleneck events reduce genetic diversity. It also reduces the population size, so that's going to make the population more vulnerable to future environmental disturbances. Another problem that results when we have an especially small population size is inbreeding. So inbreeding is when organisms mate with close family members. And this is a bad thing for populations because it increases the chances of a deleterious or a harmful mutation. And that's because the genomes of the parents are so similar that they're more likely to pass on 2 copies of a harmful allele. So let's look at a diagram here to help us understand. When we have inbreeding going on down here between 2 members of the same litter, they both have the small a, the recessive copy of this allele that's harmful, that has a mutation that's going to reduce the fitness of this offspring. So because they both contain that recessive allele, they have a higher chance of passing on to their offspring. And so the offspring of inbred parents oftentimes have decreased fitness. So smaller populations, again, are more vulnerable to this because it's just harder to find a mate that's less closely related. So with these panthers, we have a great example of inbreeding depression in the Florida panther community. So in the 1900s, habitat loss and hunting from humans reduced their population size down to just 30 panthers. And so what that resulted in is a lot of inbreeding, and it led to inbreeding depression, which means that the offspring suffered from some really harmful mutations, such as kinked tails, heart defects, decreased sperm counts, and undescended testicles in male panthers. So this makes it a lot harder for them to reproduce, and the offspring they do have a less likelihood of surviving and reproducing themselves. So this was really bad. It almost caused this species to go regionally extinct. But what happened is scientists actually brought in pumas from Texas to introduce some genetic diversity. Pumas are a subspecies of panther. And so when they bred with these pumas that had a diverse gene pool from Texas, it led to a recovery of the population and decreased this harmful inbreeding depression effect. Finally, we'll wrap up by talking about ecosystem resilience. So resilience is the ability of an ecosystem to return to its original condition after some sort of disturbance. So after a wildfire comes through and burns down most of the vegetation, or a hurricane comes through and uproots all of the plants and disturbs a lot of the soil. Just like high genetic diversity helps populations recover, high species diversity helps ecosystems recover. And that's because if there are a wider diversity of plants present in a given area, there's a higher likelihood that they're going to quickly return. And when plants return, they anchor the soil, so they prevent soil erosion. They keep the valuable microbes and decomposers in the soil to help recycle nutrients. They're also going to provide shelter and food for different animal species to return. So again, the more diverse the plant species in an area, the more quickly it can respond from a disturbance. Our practice FRQ for topic 2.1 today is going to cover the skill of describing an environmental concept or process. And I want you to describe one of the 3 levels of biodiversity, and then explain how high biodiversity at that level you described is beneficial to ecosystems. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget to like this video if it was helpful, subscribe for future APES video updates, and
Okie dokie. So, all right, so that's in your playlist. Going back to the module. So I did assign the AP classroom for 2.1. I will next week put that, where are we? I will put that question up that he just asked next week. So we'll worry about that. Like I said, this unit 2 is going to be the first part of the next 9 weeks. All right, keeping in mind that the question he just asked, like I said, I'll put it up later, but these are the 3 areas that he was referring to. So all that stuff you learned in biology when you did genetics, that's going to come back into play when we talk about genetic diversity. So you're going to have to kind of remember a little bit of biology. If you remember at the beginning, we talked about environmental science is interdisciplinary. So this is the biological part of environmental science. And then we'll get back into the geology, I'm sorry, not geology and ecology part of it with these other two topics. Okay, but that's what he was referring to. So I'll put that question back up next week. So in the meantime, you can spend the rest of today in the AP classroom doing, let me see, is mine still up? Mine tends to go to sleep when I'm not using it. Yep, it did. Okay, so the videos have been assigned. Most of you do watch them. And the 3 MCQ questions have been assigned. Okay. If you have some desperate work to work on for somebody who, because the deadline for all classes grades are today. So if you have something that you need to desperately work on, feel free to do that. Please just don't log out. At least not yet. Okay. If you have any questions, please ask. If there's a grade that I don't know, all of you are in good shape, but if there's something that you feel that you can redo and make your grade better, by all means, let me know what it is. If it needs to open, I'll open it. Just let me know. Let me know. Let me know. Oh, one of the things he talked about that he didn't use the term, but a term that you might be familiar with is survival of the fittest. So the whole conversation about the gene pool, that if you tend to breed with other members and not those of your own population, then you create genetic variation, which most of the time creates stronger genes. And stronger genes lead to stronger organisms that can survive harsh conditions. And so this is where we get that expression, survival of the fittest. Alrighty. So I'm going to do attendance, and I'm going to finish grading the things that I have left to grade. And if by any chance you didn't turn in one of those, now would be a good time to do that. Yeah, because you were. You came in while we were watching the video. Which was very tardy. And again, if you didn't answer the question for the Galapagos Islands yet, because I can't see the whole list of that because it's not going to be in this grade book, but that's going to be the first thing that's going to pop up in the grade book um, next week. So if you haven't answered that question, you should. But again, it will not be counted as part of the 9-week assignment. The last thing in the grade book for the 9 weeks is the progress check grade. Um, actually, those. Oh, excuse me. Oh, yeah, I guess I do. Okay, it's open now. And it's only open until today. Today is the last day. So it's open until October the 3rd at 11:59. Actually, Why Okay, folks, it's Friday. It's the end of the quarter. If you're good to stop where you are, go ahead and stop and let's have an early moment. Like I said, none of y'all owe me anything, and I'm grateful. And I'm almost finished uh, catching up your grades, so you should see the final grade by 2 o'clock. And grades go in on Monday. So have a good weekend.